In the spring of 1863, a groundskeeper at St. Mary's Hospital in Natchez made a discovery that was never meant to be found. He found two coffins, side by side, each marked with a different name, yet both contained the same body. A gloved hand lifts a faded tag, patient number 37A, patient number 37B. A child's lullaby hums faintly beneath the wind. Within days, the records vanished, the coroner resigned, the hospital burned, and what remained of the Whitford files were sealed indefinitely. For over a century, the official story spoke of twins, victims of a fever epidemic. But the truth buried beneath St. Mary's was far stranger and far more deliberate. Because the twins were never two people, they were one. This is the story the archives tried to erase, the hospital's greatest lie. Before we uncover the truth behind Dr. Elias Whitford and the experiment that blurred the line between birth and creation, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Tell us in the comments, which state are you listening from tonight? Now let's go back to 1853 and open the first sealed file. Natchez, Mississippi, 1853. The town glimmered like a mirage on the Mississippi River, all grace and grandeur at first glance. Cotton money had built its beauty, long avenues shaded by live oaks, white columns rising from red earth, verandas perfumed with magnolia and camphor oil. It was a place where men measured decency by decorum and cruelty by silence. Beneath the lace and manners lay the same dark rhythm that pulsed through the South, wealth extracted from human misery, grief buried beneath hymns. In those years, reputation was everything, and no name carried more weight in Natchez than that of Dr. Elias Whitford, physician, philanthropist, and founder of St. Mary's Hospital for the Indigent and Infirm. He was spoken of in church pews and newspapers alike as a man sent by Providence itself. His tall, grave figure, silver hair streaking early at his temples, and calm, deliberate speech lent him an air of divinity. Women crossed themselves as he passed. Men tipped their hats. And yet even then the air around his name carried a faint unease, something the polite never said aloud. Whitford had come to Natchez in 1845 from Charleston, the son of a small-town apothecary. His father had died of yellow fever when he was still a boy, and his early years were marked by illness, study, and solitude. Those who knew him as a student in Savannah described him as a man of exceptional brilliance and chilling curiosity. He spoke often of the space between life and death, that narrow hesitation where the body still listens, though the soul has departed. It was this fascination, they said, that made him both a genius and something else entirely. By the time he reached his 30s, Elias Whitford had already built a reputation as a medical savior. His patients claimed he could stop a fever with a touch, halt convulsions by murmuring the right Latin phrase. He published papers in obscure journals, conducted demonstrations before local physicians, and most importantly, knew how to make the powerful feel safe in his care. When the Natchez Board of Trustees proposed building a hospital in 1847, it was Whitford they entrusted to oversee it, the man who, they said, embodied both science and soul. St. Mary's Hospital stood on the bluff beyond the main town, its yellow brick brought by riverboat from New Orleans. 3 stories rose from the hillside, built in the Greek Revival style, symmetrical, cold, austere. The windows arched high and narrow, their glass panes so clear they almost disappeared in daylight. Inside, the floors shone with polished cypress, the halls smelled faintly of spirits and lavender. Every corner was calculated, every corridor exact. It was said that Whitford designed even the curvature of the staircases himself, believing geometry could influence healing. Visitors often remarked on the great dome at the center of the building. Light filtered through colored glass onto a mural painted with constellations, a celestial map Whitford called the Eye of Providence. When sunlight struck it just right, the entire atrium seemed to shimmer with gold, but few ever saw the rooms beneath it. The sub-level where the stone walls sweated and sound carried strangely, the plans listed them as storage chambers. Their doors were oak, iron-banded, and fitted with locks too intricate for a hospital's purpose. Whitford's personal quarters were connected to that lower floor by a narrow stair that only he and his assistant used. His study on the upper level was a world of meticulous order, books on anatomy and phrenology, rows of labeled jars filled with specimens suspended in alcohol, ledgers bound in black leather. His handwriting was small, disciplined, and without flourish. He recorded not only treatments but temperament, his habits, even moral deviations of his patients. To his peers, these notes were evidence of a physician devoted to the advancement of science. To those who worked in the hospital, the nurses, the janitors, the enslaved servants leased from nearby estates, they were something else entirely. There were nights when light glowed from the basement windows long past midnight. A low hum, mechanical and steady, sometimes vibrated through the floorboards. Servants whispered of voices that didn't sound like speech, broken murmurs, gasps, and once a sound like two children crying at once, though only one could be seen the next morning. When a curious orderly once asked what Whitford was studying below, the doctor replied with a calm smile, "Replication, the means by which nature repeats herself, and what happens when she does not." In public, Whitford's benevolence was unassailable. He funded churches, paid school fees for orphans, and hosted summer lectures on hygiene for women of the parish. The mayor called him the Conscience of Natchez. The clergy called him the Vessel of Mercy. But behind every sermon praising him, a strange undercurrent ran through the town. Rumors of stillborn twins delivered to the hospital and never buried, of children whose birth records vanished, of midwives dismissed and suddenly silent. Yet no one spoke too loudly. The man they would accuse was the same man who had treated their fevers, delivered their children and saved their kin. To question him was to question Providence itself. It is here that the first missing record appears. In the ledger of July 1851, the month St. Mary's expanded its maternity ward, 12 births were listed. In August, none. Yet bills for linens, milk and laudanum doubled. No inquiry followed. No mother's name appeared. Years later, when a surviving nurse was asked about that summer, she would write in a private letter to her niece, "Dr. Whitford said, 'The women were sent home, yet I never saw them leave by the front door. Only the covered wagon came, and always at dusk. We were told not to look. Some of us prayed, others learned not to.'" The hospital's wealth grew. Donations poured in from planters across Mississippi. Whitford became a gentleman of standing. Invited to Washington, honored in medical journals, praised for his humane advancements in obstetric practice. He spoke of a new generation of perfect births, and those who heard him only half understood what he meant. In his public lectures he hinted that heredity could be guided, corrected even, if studied with precision. "The Almighty," he said once, "made man in his image. Science, therefore, must strive to preserve that image from degradation." The audience applauded, never realizing what degradation he believed he was eradicating, and from whom. Those closest to him described a man of frightening calm. He rarely raised his voice, never hurried, and never seemed surprised. His household was run by a single servant, a woman named Dinah, whose origins were uncertain and whose loyalty seemed absolute. She kept to herself, silent, veiled. Children in town whispered she had no tongue. At night, the gaslights in the hospital dimmed, and Whitford would descend into the lower floor with a candle and a keyring. No one followed him, no one dared. By dawn, the light in the dome would shine again, pure and immaculate, as if nothing had ever stirred beneath it. For the people of Natchez, St. Mary's remained a place of healing, and Dr. Whitford its saint. Yet the truth, the one that would not come to light until decades later, when iron coffins were unearthed and ledgers decoded, was already taking root beneath those polished floors. The seeds of his experiment had been sown, watered by reverence and ignorance alike, and before long they would bloom into, horror. By the summer of 1854, St. Mary's stood immaculate against the heat-hazed horizon. Nothing about its whitewashed walls suggested horror, yet inside, beneath the echo of church bells and cicadas, a single secret began to loosen, through the eyes of a boy who saw too much. His name was Thomas Avery, 19 years old, an apprentice clerk recently hired to copy hospital ledgers. He came from a family of carpenters in Port Gibson and hoped that office work would spare him a life of labor. He was earnest, quiet, and grateful, precisely the sort Whitford preferred near his records. Each evening, Thomas worked in a narrow chamber beside the physician's study, transcribing case notes by candlelight. The doctor's footsteps passed behind him with the steady rhythm of a metronome, and when Whitford spoke, it was always softly. "Precision, Mr. Avery, is the soul of truth." For weeks, nothing seemed amiss. The ledgers were orderly, the arithmetic exact. Then one night, Thomas found an anomaly, a page missing between entries for March 12th and March 13th, replaced with a single line in Whitford's handwriting, "Continuation unnecessary." Both subjects merged successfully. The phrasing struck him as strange. Patients were never referred to as subjects, nor were two ever merged. When he asked the matron about the record, she told him sharply that some cases were "for the doctor's eyes alone." That was the first crack. Over the next month, Thomas noticed small things: the faint metallic odor wafting from the basement stairwell, the hospital's wagon departing long after midnight, Whitford's insistence that certain rooms remain locked even when unoccupied. Once, delivering correspondence, he glimpsed a table covered by a blood-stained sheet and what looked like a child's arm beneath it. But when he returned seconds later, the room was empty. Fear wrestled with curiosity until, Sunday, while Whitford was attending service, Thomas yielded. He carried the master key borrowed from the clerk's desk and descended the narrow stair. The air below was heavy with ether. Lamps flickered along stone walls etched with moisture. He followed a corridor to a small room lined with cabinets. Inside, he found notebooks stacked like scripture, each labeled by number and date. The writing was Whitford's, delicate, disciplined, merciless. Subject A, female infant, birth induced 41 hours premature, neural duplication incomplete, retained for observation. Subject C, male, reflex replication achieved through alternating current, twin dissolved after 72 hours. Thomas read until nausea blurred the ink. One entry described an attempt to sustain dual consciousness within a single anatomy, a phrase he could scarcely comprehend. Drawings filled the margins, skeletal outlines with doubled ribs, mirrored organs, two hearts fighting for space within one chest. At the bottom of one page in red pencil, Whitford had written, "Perfection requires the elimination of the lesser self." Thomas closed the book and fled. For days he told no one. He tried to work, but the images would not leave him. The hospital's children, the pale orphans kept in the south wing, now seemed spectral, their faces too similar, their silences rehearsed. When he finally confided in the head nurse, she paled and whispered, "Don't speak of it again. You don't understand what he is capable of." That night, his supper tasted bitter. By morning, his stomach burned as though lined with fire. He staggered through his duties, trembling, feverish. Whitford examined him personally, pressing 2 fingers to his pulse. "Exhaustion," the doctor pronounced. "A little tonic will steady you." He poured the boy a measure of clear liquid from a vial. Thomas drank because he dared not refuse. The decline was slow and deliberate. His appetite vanished, his gums darkened, his joints stiffened until even writing was agony. He recorded each symptom in the margins of his ledger: swelling of the tongue, flashes of metallic taste, sudden paralysis in the fingers. When he begged to see another physician, Whitford smiled and said gently, "Rest here, my boy. You are in capable hands." Within a week, Thomas could no longer stand. The paralysis crept upward, leaving him fully conscious yet unable to move. The nurses said he blinked answers in code, once for yes, twice for no. They didn't know what he was trying to tell them, that he had seen the journals, that he knew what the doctor was doing below. On the 10th night, Whitford visited his bedside alone. Witnesses later recalled his calm, fatherly manner as he adjusted the pillow and whispered a prayer. Then he drew the curtain, and whatever passed within remained unseen. By morning, Thomas Avery was dead. The cause listed: brain fever brought on by overexertion. The hospital buried him the next day in a modest pine coffin. Whitford himself led the service, voice steady, eyes glistening. "The Lord chooses the purest among us," he told the mourners. Young Thomas sought truth, and found peace instead. The congregation bowed their heads. Only one person, a laundress who had washed the boy's linens, later confided that she'd seen faint burns on his lips, as if from some corrosive fluid. After the funeral, Whitford ordered Thomas's belongings burned to prevent contagion, but one item escaped the fire: a scrap torn from the journal he had stolen. Decades later, when the archives of Adams County were catalogued, it surfaced folded inside an unrelated file. The paper, stained and brittle, bore 5 words in cramped handwriting: "He makes twins from one." The phrase baffled the archivist who found it in 1902. Only when the excavation at St. Mary's uncovered the iron coffins, 2 skulls sharing one spine, did those words take on meaning. At the time, however, no one questioned Dr. Whitford. His reputation stood untarnished. Thomas Avery's death was filed away like every other tragedy of the age: regrettable, unremarkable, forgotten. Yet beneath the hospital, the experiments continued. Whitford's journals would expand into volumes, his subjects drawn from the poorhouses, the plantations, the unclaimed. And though the doctor spoke of progress and providence, what he truly sought was something older and far more blasphemous: the power to divide a soul and command both halves to live. By 1855, St. Mary's Hospital was an institution beyond reproach, its marble dome gleaming like a benediction over Natchez. Yet behind the walls, the hospital had become a machine with a single mind and one secret purpose: the perfection of human duplication. Whitford's public manner never changed. He hosted luncheons for civic leaders, offered free medical care to veterans, and published essays in the Southern Medical Review on hereditary refinement. But the language concealed a darker reality. Each article spoke of selective continuance, of mirrored births, of the redemptive elimination of deformity. His staff was chosen carefully. The matron, Mrs. Eleanor Breyer, a widow of 30, obeyed him with religious devotion. The hospital's lawyer, James Berrington, managed the estates of wealthy patients who died without heirs, ensuring their assets conveniently flowed into the hospital's accounts. And the physician assistant, Dr. Samuel Rayner, provided the false death certificates that kept Whitford's records clean. Between 1855 and 1861, 27 children were born within St. Mary's and never officially recorded. Most came from poor women, plantation workers, migrants, or patients from the charity ward. Each was told her infant had perished during delivery. Each was given a sealed coffin containing stones. In truth, the infants lived, at least for a time. Whitford referred to them as his mirror children. He kept them in the lower chambers, raising them under controlled conditions. The nurses called them the quiet ones, for they seldom spoke or cried. Their faces bore an uncanny sameness, eyes too symmetrical, expressions blank as if their souls had been copied poorly. Whitford's notes from this period, discovered long after his death, are chilling in their precision. Subject L, partial success. 2 bodies, single temperament. When separated, both. Decline, requires constant supervision. Subject Q, overlap of identity observed. Dreams identical. Terminate one to test persistence of memory in the other. Termination, in Whitford's vocabulary, meant a dose of tinctured arsenic administered under the guise of medicine. Those who survived past infancy rarely reached adolescence. Their remains were dissected, documented, and sealed in iron coffins beneath the East Wing. A few townspeople began to notice patterns. The undertaker, Mr. Silas Mott, recorded a rise in child burials without accompanying family names. When he inquired at the hospital, Barrington presented him with letters of consent, each bearing the same shaky signature: E. Whitford, Guardian. Others whispered too: the washerwoman who found tiny gowns marked with twin initials, the midwife who was dismissed after questioning the number of stillbirths. But Natchez was a town that depended on order, and Whitford was part of its order. To accuse him was to unsettle the world itself. Then came the journalist. Edward Latham, a correspondent from the New Orleans Daily Crescent, arrived in 1858 to write a feature on medical progress in the southern states. He was young, skeptical, and shrewd enough to notice the missing names in the hospital's registry. Whitford welcomed him with courtesy, showing him the bright wards and the children playing in the garden. "Our success," he told the reporter, "lies in the constancy of nature. Every life is an echo of another." But Latham was not satisfied. He returned at night, bribing a porter for access to the storerooms. What he found there, he never published in his lifetime. Fragments of anatomical sketches showing doubled spines and crossed circulatory systems. Jars labeled Series G, incomplete, and in a locked drawer, a child's cast of plaster, perfect on one side and blurred on the other. He confronted Whitford the next morning. Witnesses recalled a calm exchange. The journalist pale, the doctor composed. "You misunderstand my purpose," Whitford said. "I am restoring what God intended: symmetry, order, obedience in flesh." That evening, Latham fell violently ill at his lodging. His symptoms mirrored those of Thomas Avery: metallic taste, tremors, eventual paralysis. The attending physician, none other than Dr. Rayner, attributed it to malarial exhaustion. Latham died within 48 hours. His body was shipped to New Orleans in a sealed casket, unexamined. After his death, the Daily Crescent printed only a brief obituary. Edward Latham, taken by fever while in pursuit of his profession, God rest his industrious soul. Within St. Mary's, Whitford's control deepened. The Civil War approached, and with it, the chaos he would use as cover. Soldiers wounded at Shiloh and Corinth filled the upper wards, providing a fresh supply of unclaimed specimens. Whitford's assistants, loyal through fear or fascination, performed his instructions without question. In one surviving letter, Matron Breyer wrote to Barrington, "The doctor says the divided must be made whole. He speaks of two infants whose hearts beat in time though their mothers never met. He calls it providence. I call it terror." By 1862, even his staff began to disappear. Rayner left suddenly for Vicksburg and was later found drowned in the river. Dinah, the mute attendant, vanished entirely. Breyer herself was committed to the state asylum after claiming she heard voices from beneath the floor, children scratching to be let out. When inspectors from the Confederate Medical Board visited in 1863, they found the hospital eerily quiet. Whitford presented pristine ledgers, spotless corridors, and a chapel filled with the soft sound of hymns recorded from his patients. "A sanctum of healing," their report concluded. Yet outside the walls, soldiers whispered of strange graves behind the hospital orchard, narrow, unmarked, too many for 1 year. In the decades that followed, no record of Whitford's trials would appear in any medical journal, but survivors, former nurses, laborers, a mortician's apprentice, would later give testimonies that matched with eerie precision: the faint humming in the basement, the identical children who never aged, the doctor's repeated phrase whispered like a prayer: 2 from 1, 1 from 2. It was no longer medicine, it was ritual. The town, bound by pride and fear, kept its silence. Whitford's donors remained powerful, his legacy untouchable. The local clergy preached that God's work is often misunderstood by the faint-hearted. The people nodded, as they always had. And so the machine turned, fed by reverence, protected by bureaucracy, and hidden beneath marble and hymn. Until the war itself tore the South apart, and with it, the delicate structure that kept the secret buried. The summer of 1861 came heavy and slow, the kind that made even the air taste of iron. The Mississippi carried the reflection of war, Boats of conscripts drifting south, banners fluttering, drums echoing across the bluffs of Natchez. The town had changed its colours overnight, but within the high walls of St. Mary's Hospital time seemed to stop. The dome still gleamed, the ward still smelled of lavender, and Dr. Elias Whitford still moved through the halls like a ghost obeying a rhythm only he could hear. The townspeople whispered that Whitford had grown pale and distracted. He rarely appeared in church now. His public lectures ceased. When asked about the coming war, he replied, "Conflict purifies. It separates what must live from what cannot." No one knew what he meant. Inside his private rooms, the candles burned at all hours. His journals multiplied. In one of them, dated May 1861, his hand shook visibly across the page. The subject continues to reflect herself in sleep. 2 minds, 1 pulse. If the boundary could be held, if the division remains stable, I will have conquered death itself. Servants noticed that the subject was a child, a small girl of about 7, with hair pale as straw and skin almost translucent. She was seen only once, led by Dinah through a side corridor toward the lower wing, her eyes wide and strangely calm. No one ever learned her name. By midsummer, sickness began spreading among the hospital staff. It started with trembling hands, then weakness, then the tightening of the jaw, symptoms Whitford dismissed as malarial strain. One attendant, a young orderly named Thomas Clay, kept a private journal. His last entry, found years later behind a loose floorboard, read, "The doctor says it is fever, but the fever thinks. It knows our names. I hear voices when I close my eyes. A child's breath, close to my ear, asking to be let out." Within a week, Clay was dead. His skin bore faint grey stains around the mouth and fingertips. The coroner's report listed arsenical consumption. Whitford himself signed it. The war crept closer, and with it came soldiers, wounded and fevered, filling every cot. Whitford worked tirelessly, as though possessed, yet rumours spread faster than the illness. A Confederate officer stationed nearby reported hearing inhuman cries from beneath the hospital grounds after midnight. When he demanded an inspection, Whitford led him through spotless halls, speaking gently, confidently. The officer left apologizing for the intrusion. But that night, the townspeople saw smoke rising from the hospital's back field, a bonfire of papers, linens, and something heavier that cracked when it burned. On August the 14th, a storm struck the river. Lightning split the dome of St. Mary's clean through. The glass mural of constellations shattered, raining colour over the marble floor. In the morning, Whitford ordered the dome boarded up. He said it was God's signal to look inward. The town believed him, as always. Whitford listened without expression. When the Reverend accused him of false burials, the doctor smiled faintly. "Reverend," he said, "you mistake imitation for deceit. If God repeats his creation endlessly, why should we not study the mechanism?" That evening, Price left town and never returned. His horse was found 3 days later grazing by the riverbank, saddle intact, riderless. Only one person dared to question him now: Reverend Malcolm Price, a young minister newly arrived from Vicksburg. He'd been visiting the wounded and had noticed inconsistencies in the burial records. Children listed as orphans had no origin, no surnames, and no graves in the churchyard. He confronted Whitford privately in the chapel, his voice trembling with both fear and righteousness. The tension grew unbearable. Patients disappeared from the hospital registers entirely. In their place appeared coded entries, symbols, not names, and dates marked only by phases of the moon. Whitford rarely ate or slept. He began locking the south wing at dusk, carrying the keys on a silver chain under his collar. One night in September, a nurse named Margaret Lowe crept down the stairs after hearing what she described as a child calling for its twin. She carried a lantern and followed the sound through the narrow passage under the maternity ward, a space long said to be abandoned. The light caught rows of glass jars along the wall, each containing something small and pale floating in amber fluid. Before she could scream, a shadow moved behind her. The next morning, her bed was empty. Whitford told the staff she had gone home to care for her mother. No one asked further. As the war dragged on, Natchez grew poorer. Families fled, fields emptied, but St. Mary's remained untouched, as if protected by some unspoken pact. Whitford's influence endured even as the town decayed around him. Only Dinah stayed loyal, her silence now seeming almost holy. She was seen carrying sealed crates to the cellar, her face expressionless beneath the flicker of oil lamps. Then, in early 1863, the first true outsider arrived, a war correspondent named Jonas Greaves traveling with Union lines. Posing as a physician, he gained access to the hospital after the Confederate retreat. Greaves's later notes, published privately in 1871, are the only surviving first-hand account of the final weeks. The establishment presents itself as sanctuary, yet there is a corruption beneath the order. The doctor is of a singular presence, courteous, articulate, utterly devoid of warmth. I have observed a child who mirrors his every gesture. When he coughs, she coughs. When he turns, her eyes fall. So before the movement occurs, I have seen nothing so unholy. Greaves claimed that beneath the hospital was a cistern where Whitford conducted reanimations using ice, salt, and galvanic current. He described the smell of ether, the sound of water running where no water should be, and a metal table bearing the impression of two bodies conjoined along the spine. When Greaves confronted Whitford, the doctor calmly denied everything. Science, he said, is accused of witchcraft in every century, yet the truth survives persecution. That night, Greaves fled the hospital. The pages of his journal end abruptly with a single line: "The river runs backward here." By winter's end, the town was starving. St. Mary's shut its doors, officially due to lack of supplies. But from the river, fishermen still saw lamplight glowing from the basement windows. Then, on the night of March 2nd, 1864, the light vanished for good. When the first group of soldiers entered days later, they found the upper wards empty, beds stripped, walls blackened by smoke. The air was heavy with lime and decay. In the lower vault, they discovered water up to the knees, seeping from the cistern. At its center floated a shape tangled in cloth, a man's body, hands bound with surgical wire. The face, though swollen and pale, was unmistakable. Dr. Elias Whitford was dead. Yet something about the scene disturbed them beyond the corpse itself. In the reflection of the lantern light, they saw another face beside his, smaller, almost childlike, the features eerily identical. When they pulled the body closer, the second face dissolved, as though it had been nothing but shadow and water. The coroner listed cause of death as drowning. No investigation followed. The hospital was condemned, its grounds abandoned, but within months, townspeople reported hearing faint scratching beneath the well near the Sout wing. Children claimed to see a little girl walking along the riverbank at dusk, holding another child's hand, though only one set of footprints trailed behind. Years later, when reconstruction crews demolished the ruins, they unearthed a cluster of coffins nailed shut from the inside. The bodies within were twisted, claw marks etched deep into the lids. Among them lay a single smaller coffin, empty, save for a lock of white blonde hair and a tag reading, Specimen 1A, Continuity Achieved. No one spoke of it publicly. The Whitford family's surviving relatives used their wealth to suppress reports. The hospital's documents were sealed in the county archives under private medical research, not for release. Over time, memory itself began to fade. The great dome was rebuilt as a courthouse. The basement flooded, then collapsed. The name Whitford vanished from the town's lips. But the soil remembered. After heavy rains, the earth still shifts near the old foundation, as if something beneath it moves when no one is watching. Locals say if you stand there at night and whisper your own name, a second voice whispers it back, softly, perfectly, in unison. And that voice, they say, Sounds like a child trying to remember which one she truly is. The story of St. Mary's Hospital should have ended in 1864, when the last of the smoke cleared over the ruins and Dr. Elias Whitford's body was carried up from the flooded cistern. But stories like these never end where they should. They only wait. For more than a century, the site was repurposed, erased, and rebuilt again, as if the earth itself were trying to cover its own memory. In 1908, the City Council approved construction of a new courthouse directly atop the remains of St. Mary's. The workers unearthed fragments, rusted scalpels, glass stoppers, teeth. The foreman ordered them buried again. Medical waste, he called it. Officially, the hospital records were destroyed in a fire. Unofficially, they were moved, sealed under a private archive in Jackson, marked medical research files, restricted access. The Whitford family still had money, still sat on boards, still owned land. Their name appeared in hospital wings, church plaques, scholarships. The story was rewritten as legend. Dr. Whitford, pioneer physician, died heroically of fever while tending the poor. And that might have remained the truth, if not for a discovery in 2019. It began with a renovation, the city of Natchez planning to expand the courthouse parking lot. During excavation, workers struck something solid 3 feet beneath the surface, a rusted metal trunk, its hinges fused shut. The contractor assumed it was scrap, but when a crowbar pried it open, the smell of damp paper and ether filled the air. Inside were 7 leather-bound journals, the pages warped but legible, each bearing the same mark embossed in gold, E.W. The trunk was sent to the County Historical Office for cataloguing. That's where I first saw it. The journals were written in a steady, elegant hand, Whitford's hand, and dated between 1849 and 1864. The early volumes matched the known records: patient notes, delivers, epidemics, but the later ones were something else entirely. Page after page of drawings, skeletal diagrams, double silhouettes joined at the spine, lists of subjects identified only by letters and numbers. Beside each entry, measurements, weights, ages. Most disturbingly, the notation, retained for reflection. There were references to continuity experiments, to mirror subjects, to life refracted through division. The final volume ended abruptly with a single sentence written across the page: "She no longer needs the other." When I brought this to the attention of the archives supervisor, she told me to stop reading. "That box isn't ours anymore," she said. "The Whitford Trust has claimed it." By morning, the trunk was gone. I should have left it there. But something about those journals clung to me, the precision of them, the calm certainty with which he described things that should never have been possible. I began tracing the records that survived around the edges of the official story: birth ledgers, property deeds, unmarked graves. What I found was a pattern. Between 1849 and 1858, 21 children were recorded as stillborn at St. Mary's. Yet burial certificates exist for only 12. The other 9 vanish from all documentation, but one name, written faintly in pencil on a separate slip of paper attached to a baptism ledger, stood out: Clara Whitford, born 1856. No such child appears in the family genealogies, no photograph, no obituary. But in one of the doctor's letters to his wife, preserved in the Whitford family correspondence, he writes, "Clara's reflection troubles her again. The smaller one speaks in her sleep. I hear both voices when I stand outside the door." When I showed this to a local historian, he shook his head. "Old ghost story," he said. "The doctor lost his daughter, that's all. People made it worse." But the more I looked, the worse it truly became. There was a brief report in an 1865 edition of the Natchez Courier. Workers dismantling the remains of St. Mary's Hospital discovered several small coffins, improperly sealed. Local clergy to perform reburial at once. No names, no follow-up. The burial ground of St. Mary's is now a small paved square beside the courthouse, unmarked except for a magnolia tree. One evening, I visited it. The ground felt uneven, soft underfoot. At the base of the tree lay fragments of stone, initials too worn to read. As I stood there, the courthouse bell struck 6. The air vibrated, and faintly, beneath the sound, I could swear I heard another chime answering it, lower, slower, as if from underground. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept rereading Whitford's notes, his meticulous obsession with symmetry. "If the reflection holds," he wrote, "then division is illusion. 2 minds, 1 source. The mirror must remain intact or both perish." What did he mean by the mirror? Weeks later, I found the answer, or something close to it, in a locked drawer of the Historical Office's microfilm archive. Someone had mislabeled a roll as Municipal Building Plans, 1908. But the first image that appeared on the screen was a blueprint of the old hospital foundations. Beneath the main building, a structure not listed on any public record, a circular chamber 12 feet below ground, connected by a narrow shaft to the cistern. In the center of the diagram, a symbol, 2 circles overlapping, like the vesica pieces used in early Christian art to represent duality in creation. Beside it, written in the margin, "Reflection Room, sealed after incident." The microfilm reel ended abruptly, torn. 2 days later, when I returned to print copies, the drawer was empty. The attendant said there had never been a reel with that label. I began contacting descendants of the Whitford family. Most ignos read me. One woman, a retired school teacher in Baton Rouge, agreed to speak on the condition I not record her name. She told me her grandmother refused to enter rooms with mirrors. Said there was something wrong with her reflection, she said. Said sometimes it smiled when she didn't. When I showed her a copy of Whitford's handwriting, the woman went pale. "That's the same as on our family Bible," she whispered, "except his name was never mentioned. We were told to say he died before the war." After that interview, she stopped answering calls. In October 2021, the city announced plans to replace the old courthouse's foundation due to structural instability. During drilling, workers hit a void, a collapsed chamber filled with stagnant water and debris. The official statement referred to it as a drainage anomaly, but one of the workers, speaking anonymously, described something else. He said there were bones, dozens of them, tangled in wire. And the worst thing, he told me, was that some of them were smaller bones but matched perfectly, left and right, like they belonged to the same person twice. Before any formal investigation could begin, the site was sealed. Days later, torrential rain flooded the area, washing away soil and collapsing part of the excavation pit. The reports vanished from the city's website within hours. I went there myself after the rain stopped. The ground was thick with mud. Half of the old courthouse foundation had sunk several inches, leaving cracks running like veins across the asphalt. Near the center of the lot, I found a piece of corroded brass, the corner of a small tag. Only 2 letters were visible, CW. As I stood holding it, I heard something, faint, rhythmic, like breathing. The sound was coming from below, beneath the mud. I told myself it was water draining through broken pipes. But the rhythm was too steady. It was a heartbeat, slow, deliberate, and perfectly even. That was 3 months ago. Since then, the dreams have begun, always the same. A corridor of white tiles, a girl standing at the end of it, her face hidden by light. She raises her hand, and for a moment, I think she's waving. Then I see she's not alone. There's another hand beside hers, moving in the exact same motion, but the second figure has no face. I wake with my hand raised, fingers stiff, nails marked with half-moon indentations, as if someone had been gripping them tightly. Last week, I returned to the archives one final time. I wanted to confirm whether any of Whitford's journals still existed, or if they'd all been taken by the trust. The clerk told me there were none on record. Then, as I turned to leave, she added quietly, "You didn't hear this from me, but sometimes they come back." "What do you mean?" I asked. She looked past me toward the rows of shelves. Boxes appear where there weren't any before, no tags, no requests, just here. That night I received an envelope on my doorstep. No return address. Inside was a single photograph, black and white, grainy. It showed the courtyard of St. Mary's before the fire, the great dome intact. At first it seemed ordinary. Then I noticed the reflection in one of the windows, a small girl, standing behind the photographer staring directly into the lens. Her eyes were pale and empty, and beside her, half faded in the exposure, was a second figure, same height, same face, same dress. The photo was dated March 1st, 1864, the night before Whitford's death. I keep it sealed now, but sometimes I take it out and hold it to the light. The reflection never changes, except once. I swear one of them blinked. I've tried to tell myself that this is nothing more than a historical obsession, that the sounds I hear under my floorboards are pipes, that the shadows on the wall are tricks of exhaustion. But sometimes, in the quiet between midnight and dawn, I hear two sets of footsteps in the hall. If you ever visit Natchez, you won't find St. Mary's on any map. The courthouse stands where the hospital once was, its marble steps polished, its archives locked. But the magnolia tree still grows in the square beside it, roots curling deep into the soil. And if you stand there at dusk, you can sometimes hear scratching, soft at first, then desperate, like fingernails against wood. The locals say it's just the wind. But the old cemetery caretaker told me something different. It's them, he said, the ones he made and unmade, still trying to tell which one's real. He wouldn't say anything else. I don't go there after dark anymore, not since the last storm when the river rose and the water turned the color of rust. The courthouse lights went out that night, every bulb shattering at once. For a few seconds the windows glowed, not from inside but from beneath, as if something in the earth was reflecting upward. And in that light, people said you could see two figures standing where the hospital once was, both children, both still, and only one cast a shadow. Some secrets buried in Natchez may never be fully revealed,